Hi, this is Diane, and I wanted to give you some teaching tips for teaching December song. And what I've found is it's been helpful for teachers. They've been asking me a lot for printed versions of how I teach these pieces. So what I've done is make a few sheets of the sort of preliminary things that work for my students, the steps that I would go through that you might not think to do yourself because you don't know the piece and you didn't write the piece. So this piece, December Song, has a bell figure that goes through the whole thing that sounds like this when it's all put together. We've got, and it's built on 2, 3, 5, playing at one time, and then your thumb playing. But what I did was, the first thing that I would do with my students is I would make up a little exercise, and it's printed out here. So here's the exercise. 2, 3, 5, 1. 2, 3, 5, 1. 2, 3, 5, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. And this is prepare. Close your hand. Get ready for the F sharp. So one thing that helps my students a lot is not thinking of this as the goal and having your other fingers try and stay out of the way. Instead, it helps a lot to notice that your third finger is going to take the place of your thumb. So each time that move is identical. This goes over here. And on the way up, I let my thumb just kind of get dragged along for the show like that, and I recover. So then when we do it blocked, it's the same thing, but everything's ready to go. And then you let your thumb come back. So don't play it or teach it this way. We tend to think of things like this and then try to move this way, but it's a terrible idea. Do your prep. And then in the left hand, there are all kinds of open fifths. Who haven't done a lot of those, it's not always so obvious how to do that. So I made a little exercise. So if you practice 1, 5, switch to your thumb, steal that note. Steal 5. You can do that as long as the student needs to. They might enjoy it. You can even make it kind of like a little dance or whatever works for them. And then you can practice it in a more grounded way. Replay 5 so you become aware of it. Switch to your thumb, open your hand, play 5 and 1. Play 1, switch to 5. So this kind of inchworm movement is one thing my students seem to really love. And sometimes when they need to not quite go all the way, like in a piece where maybe they need to go here instead, I'll tell them to be a bad inchworm, not to get quite over all the way. I'll say, oh, just be a bad inchworm. But here, we want to just be able to rely on that motion, so it can be helpful to isolate that moment. And the piece is built basically on a hemiola. If you don't know what a hemiola is, it's when you have one time signature that suddenly feels like another one. So it's sort of, this left hand is going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the right hand's going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But because it all lines up really clearly and you can see exactly where things are supposed to go, it's not terribly difficult to play. And you can do it slowly and it'll still sound good. Okay, now in the middle section, there's a little hint of Silent Night that comes in. And I just put a special little exercise to take a look at what these chords are and pointed out that one of them is major, one of them is minor, and it might be worth knowing which one's which. I did not put a question in here, but there's only one rest in this piece and it would be worth noticing where that rest happens. And then there's a little passage in the middle section where you have to switch fingers, and so I made a little exercise that you can practice that kind of builds on what happened in November Song. In November Song we had this kind of figure where we were going 5, 4, 3, 2. So this is building on that, but in a different kind of a piece. We've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, and that gets you ready to go. So I wrote that out with finger changes, and then I wrote it again with the suggestion to change silently to your third finger so your third finger's ready to play. And then at the very end of the piece, we also have a change, which I wrote out just because you're used to doing these as singles, and at the end we get. So sometimes it's helpful to just have all the fingerings written out, so that's what happens there, so that when the student gets to the end, that's not a surprise to them. And then for the very final chord, we actually have a chord that's in first inversion. So I show you at the very end of the piece, it says, let's practice moving. And I have a little exercise that helps you switch 3, 5, 3, and then switch to your thumb and open it to get to the first inversion chord. And there's a little question that says which notes are in both chords, because a lot of times students really need a little bit of help to notice that these two notes are actually going to be the same two notes as your thumb and second finger are going to play in the second chord. So hopefully with these tips, you'll be armed and ready to prepare your students to play December Song.